Hello, my brothers and sisters, and welcome to another episode of Off the Beaten Path, the show that looks at paranormal events both historically as well as in modern day times. As always, I'm your host, Reverend Hagen. Now, about 4.5 years ago or so, I did a show on a place called the Skinwalker Ranch. You may have heard of it. It's been on the History Channel and the Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch. An amazing show. But I did this show about 4.5 years ago, right around when they launched Skinwalker Ranch, or The Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch. I'd first heard about it in like 91, 92. Always wanted to do a boots-on-the-ground investigation. Sadly, I have not gotten the chance yet. I'm still holding out hope. But with all the stuff that was happening on this ranch, and in case you didn't see that episode and you've never heard of Skinwalker Ranch, it's a ranch in Utah, out in the middle of nowhere in Utah. Where all these paranormal, anomalous events take place. There are orbs floating around, UFOs, UAPs, vortexes, cryptoids. More than one person has seen a giant wolf. The family that used to live there, and some of the security guys that worked for NIDS, when a guy named Bob Bigelow, there it is, owned the property and was working with the U.S. government to try to figure out what was going on this ranch, right? So it seemed like, God, how weird that this valley that was supposedly cursed on this ranch, that's kind of the heart of the whole thing, would have all of this stuff going on. It didn't make a whole lot of sense. And yet, it was happening. And the work that they have done on Skinwalker Ranch is amazing. Well, it turns out that's not the only ranch that's happening to. There were also cattle mutilations on the ranch, and they even had some of those on the show and showed a UFO over the cow right after it dropped dead. Absolutely amazing stuff. But there is another ranch. It's called the Bradshaw Ranch, and that is what we're going to be looking at today. Now, the Bradshaw Ranch is about 7 miles outside of Sedona, Arizona. If you don't know what Sedona is kind of this mecca for New Age groups, New Age thinking, meditation, spiritual energy, vortexes, UFOs. Kind of sounds a little familiar, but this is actually a town, and there's an entire cottage industry that caters to all this stuff. It's pretty amazing. Never been there again myself. I've been to every state in the Union. I've been all over Europe, all over Asia, and I have never been to Sedona. It's a tragedy, if we're being honest. Just because it sounds so interesting and a lot of fun. It also has the distinction of being the town with more UFO sightings than any other town on planet Earth. Yeah, I said it. More UFO sightings than anywhere in the world, which in and of itself is amazing. There's so much stuff going on in Sedona that there's a gal that does tours at night to spot UFOs. She gives everybody IR cameras, and they all go out there and start filming. And according to her, out of the hundreds of tours that she has given, only 3 or 5, and I can't remember which one because of my gray matter, only 3 to 5 people have not had some kind of experience, which is absolutely amazing. Normally, I'd give her a plug right here. Put her name, say, hey, give this gal a call, try to help her business. The only deal is I only saw one thing on her on a documentary on the Bradshaw Ranch. So I can't personally vouch for this gal. She seems very nice in the documentary. She seems to really believe what she's doing. She seems to believe what she's saying. And a lot of the people that have gone on their tours swear by it. They get the film of the, infrared sightings of the UAPs and the UFOs. Amazing. So look her up. She's out of Sedona, Arizona, if you're into that kind of thing. And it actually sounds like a lot of fun. So Sedona is this kind of hotbed. Now, people don't go normally to see UFOs. They go there for spiritual enlightenment. People meditate there. They have group ceremonies there, drumming circles, the whole shebang. And even if it all is BS, and I don't personally believe it is, it seems to help them. It seems to make them feel better about their life, the universe, and everything. So, what the hell? I still think it's pretty neat, regardless if it's factually true or not. But again, in my opinion, it is. There's also talk of a lot of vortexes in there. Dun, dun, dun. And I don't just mean swirling water vortexes, like energy vortexes on these certain rock formations. That some are measurable. So there is that. But we're not talking about Sedona, my brothers and sisters. Oh no. We are talking about the Bradshaw Ranch, 7.5 miles to the west. Now, the Bradshaw Ranch was built in 1920, but it really kind of gained steam when it was purchased by Bob and Linda Bradshaw in 1960. Now, Bob was a stuntman at the time, and he, after he bought the ranch, he made it a film set of sorts. Kind of built a little an old western town. They filmed 5 movies there, two of which, I stand corrected, were Elvis Presley movies. 1 was a John Wayne movie, 2 TV series, and a bunch of commercials. So this was a functioning movie set or production set, and also a functioning ranch. The horses, the cattle, all the stuff they used in the movies and in the TV, the commercials, the series, the whole 9 yards, were from their ranch. Now, as soon as they moved in, Linda would complain that she always felt like she was being watched. Like, no matter what she was doing, she just had this, sense that somebody is watching me right now. Now, this feeling not only persisted, but kind of grew. The intensity of the experience, really grew. The dogs even picked up on it. Now, some people said the dogs just picked up on the tension of Linda. I don't believe that's the case, that because of the way the animals reacted, they were barking at the windows. They were barking at the door. Now, on more than one occasion, way more than one occasion, Bob would run out and check out the scene. What is out here? And they never saw anything. It was so prevalent, though, that Linda started referring to them as the intruders. Now, Linda was very fond of taking walks at night, right at dusk and a little bit after dusk. Sometimes she'd take her son, and sometimes she wouldn't. Sometimes she just wanted to be out alone in the desert. I live in the desert here. I actually live on a ranch in the desert, in the high desert, the Mojave Desert of Southern California. And I can tell you, when I first moved out here, I was like, yeesh, just because it gets so hot in the summer here. And I mean, my first summer, we had days that were 122 degrees, and that's not an exaggeration. Just this last year, 117, 118 were not an anomaly. We had weeks like that, brutally hot. I was from Northern California. In fact, I had just gotten out of the Army at Fort Lewis when I moved out to the high desert with my wife at the time. And she wanted to raise her family around, or our kids around her family. You can't blame her for that, and I certainly couldn't. So I took my oldest son and we moved out there, or out here, I should say. And at first I couldn't take it. I was so used to being in the forest, right, with trees around me, because Northern California, or not Seattle, but Washington at Fort Lewis, there's trees everywhere. And you have a certain amount of concealment when you're walking around. There's a certain amount of privacy. Out in the desert, there is nothing. You can see for miles, and that is not an exaggeration either. So I felt very exposed. Now cut to 20 years later, and I get twitchy when I go into the forest, right? Because now I can't see anything coming. I'm so used to living out here that I feel confined in the forest, which is just surreal to me because I grew up around the woods. All that's beside the point. Yeah, that was a bit of a ramble, but it's something I think we're both going to have to live with, okay? The thing about the desert is there is an absolute beauty to it. The sunsets, the sunrises, gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. So I do not have a hard time thinking at all that this woman would love to walk at dusk and right after sunset, because it's a lot cooler, and it's just a beautiful time out in the desert. So when she and her son are walking one time, all of a sudden they start seeing lights appearing all over their property, like not Christmas lights, but orbs, like I want to say 25-cent, 50-cent orbs, kind of dotted around, lighting, going on and off, kind of like a firefly would, but in an orb. And when I say orb, I'm not talking about dust particles that a lot of people say, look at all the orbs in this picture. These are something with their own light source, very clearly. You're not seeing through them. You are seeing a ball of energy, okay? That's what she was seeing. And then they would blink out, and then they'd blink on. Some walks they'd be on, some walks they were not on. Excuse me, I'm a little tongue-tied. Now, on one occasion, she and Bob were having dinner, and if this is their house, right? My fist is their house. They were having dinner, and out of their window, here in the house, on this corner of the house, they saw what Linda described as a vortex. And within that vortex, within that energy field, she saw images of the past. Like it was a vortex to another time and another place, which is absolutely wild. She even snapped some pictures of it. It turns out that Linda was an avid photographer and took tons of pictures of things that were going on at the ranch. But that is wild, an energy vortex of all things, and a time vortex. Crazy. Now, at some point in all of this stuff that was going on, a guy named Tom Dongo, I had to check my notes, Tom Dongo, crazy name, but seems like a decent enough fellow, started hanging out the ranch. He was starting to help them investigate what was going on at this ranch. He was a UFO researcher. And he and Linda ended up writing a book entitled Merging Dimensions, The Incredible Saga of the Bradshaw Ranch. This book documented the strange and unusual events that were happening on this ranch. What's remarkable to me is that they really seem to embrace this, both she and Bob, but particularly Linda, inviting Tom to come on, help investigate it, ended up writing a book about it. Instead of fleeing from it or being, I'm sure it was upsetting, don't get me wrong, but really seemed to embrace that this phenomenon was going on her property. Now, Tom Dongo would later go on to claim that his experience on the Bradshaw Ranch gave him certain abilities, for lack of a better term. One of which was he was a human X-ray machine. He had X-ray vision. He claimed, and apparently this was verified by a lot of people and more than a few doctors, that he could look at somebody and see what was going on inside of their body, actually help diagnose problems. In fact, he had said in an interview, and I couldn't verify this, that UC Berkeley wanted to run a bunch of tests on him, and for whatever reason that ended up not happening. In the interview, though, you can't see that. I hadn't seen any interviews before his experience on the ranch, but he kind of seems like a changed man without ever seeing how he used to be. I don't know, maybe he always was that a little peculiar in his actions. I know I'm one to talk, but it was really an insightful interview. The other thing he said is that he had been given psychic powers, that he was able to communicate with people at great distances, people sitting there. He could project thoughts into their minds and hear their thoughts in return. I don't know if any of that's true. It was, other than putting him to the test, which the interviewer didn't, I don't know how you would verify anything like that, other than interview some of the people that he had apparently done this with. Couldn't find anything on it in my research, but that's his claim. And I don't have any reason to doubt him other than he did seem a little off. I know that's crazy and that's a very old person thing to say, but I am an old person, so I can say it. Oh boy, it just seemed a little bit off, that kind of old school thinking. But he just seemed a little bit off, if I'm being honest. Now, skipping ahead a bit, when nobody was living on the ranch for a minute, they would allow paranormal investigators to come on and investigate, as well as some documentary crews documenting the paranormal investigators doing their investigations. And they got some really interesting things. One of the things that they found, there was one guy that was kind of the man doing that stuff. and he kind of passed the torch to this younger guy. And they found a lot of these bipedal footprints, but they were two-toed, right? There you go, kind of like a live long and prosper kind of thing, but more almost like dinosaur tracks, for lack of a better term, which is pretty off the wall. Watching him, though, in some of these documentaries, that particular guy, it wasn't his mohawk that threw me off at all. Some of my best friends have mohawks. But it was the lack of corroborating evidence. It was driving me crazy. He would just walk up to a spot and say, here are some prints, with not a whole lot of background story. I mean, there were some strange prints, but there's no proof. I know some of you guys have called me a skeptic over the years. It's not that I'm a skeptic. I am a believer, but you have to be able to back it up. You have to be able to back it off. You have to be able to back it up. You know what I'm saying? Like, there was just no way to corroborate, the evidence. And that could be a stickler with me. If I were there doing the boots on the ground thing and I ran across those and knew that nobody could have gone out there, I'd have been down. But the way it was presented, it just seemed a little suspect to me. And it did line up with Linda's description of seeing a weird bipedal thing that was not Bigfoot, that was more reptilian. I hate to use that word, but for lack of a better term. Now, during the same documentary with the Mohawk guy, there was a scientist that was talking about the geology, the geographic features of the Bradshaw Ranch. And according to him, and there was no need to doubt him, I think this was actually corroborated by Beyond Skinwalker Ranch that did a show on the Bradshaw Ranch, where he was saying that it was built on a huge quartz deposit that had a lot of red iron in it. Now, quartz is used to... quartz conducts electricity, period. And red iron is used to transmit radio signals. So it was pretty strange, but remember that fact, because one of the crazy things is... during the investigation by the satellite of Skinwalker Ranch, by the two guys that were doing Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, they discovered the 1.7 gigahertz frequency that they had only seen on Skinwalker Ranch before this. Now, the 1.6, 1.7 gigahertz frequency is used for interstellar communication, for communicating into space, and to have those signals come back. Now, that is a proprietary signal that's only used by the military. Now, so there should be no way this is naturally occurring on both the Skinwalker Ranch and the Bradshaw Ranch. Now, it started happening on the Bradshaw Ranch when they started shooting lasers into the mountains of this area that was supposedly there's a military base in the rocks in this mountain, like an underground base. The legends go that there are tunnels that come from that mountainous area directly under Bradshaw Ranch. Even when you check with the History Channel, there's no corroborating evidence for that, although they did mention it in the show. The 1.7 gigahertz, though, is just an anomaly, a very strange anomaly, especially when it's a proprietary signal that's only used by the military, and they can jump down you for that. In fact, in a later episode, they were trying to communicate when that signal would come on another haunted area, right, or a paranormal area. And they found a loophole using a ham radio. That's the only way you can transmit even close to that. But even with that, the restrictions are very hard. So it's very strange that both the Skinwalker Ranch and the Bradshaw Ranch, when these anomalous things are happening, it's a 1.7 gigahertz signal, like I said, the proprietary signal for the military for interstellar communication. Very, very strange. One of the other really wild experiments that Beyond the Skinwalker Ranch did at the Bradshaw Ranch was they had a drone and they were going to fly it over to that military area, because you can't get into Bradshaw Ranch anymore. It's completely fenced off. There are power sources there, right? There are air conditioning units, so something is going on in there. It could be the environmental study on global warming, which still seems a little bit weird to me. Just really off the wall for the amount of funding and that the government would purchase and do that study under the auspices of the Arizona University. I don't know. For me, I've got a pretty decent bullshit meter, pardon my French, because of my nefarious past. And it seemed really shaded to me. Anywho's, so they were flying this drone over there, and what happened is the drone blacked out. The screen blacked out on the drone. It said restricted airspace. The drone is returning, and then the drone came back, operating perfectly fine. Another experiment that had happened as well, which is why they were doing it on the show, where somebody had flown their drone out there. That message came up on the screen on the phone, because usually you're guiding it with your phone or a remote control that has a screen because you're operating a camera, and that message came up on the screen and the drone returned. They were able to duplicate that experiment, and that's what led to the laser experiment against the Mesa. They did see some anomalous UAPs and UFOs during that experiment, but then with the drone thing, it came back. Very, very fascinating and very weird. So here's another space out in the middle of nowhere, another ranch of all things out in the middle of nowhere, where these crazy, crazy things are happening. So what do you think? What do you think? Please leave in the comments of what's going on here. Personally, after watching Skinwalker Ranch, Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch, and Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, though just the episode that dealt with the Bradshaw Ranch, it really seems like there's some sort of interdimensional portal. And that's what these scientists at Skinwalker Ranch are saying. They won't say it definitively because the main guy, Travis, and I think you know him, southern accent, blonde hair, kind of thinning, used to work for the government, very high clearance, still a little bit shady to me, but really smart guy, will say stuff like that we could easily be looking at a dimensional portal from the experiments that they've done there. Absolutely wild. And one other thing I want to bring up about Skinwalker Ranch, I know this is about Bradshaw Ranch, but I'm going to bring it up anyway, is that they realized that they had a quarter of a second time differential at one point during their investigations. That may not sound like anything, but that is huge, that they all of a sudden are missing a quarter of a second of time. This wasn't just on somebody's Timex. This is on all the equipment they have there that are measuring everything from radio frequencies to EMF readings to radiation to gamma radiation, the whole 9 yards. It's absolutely wild. So that's the explanation I have. I don't know of any other explanation. I'm not buying any kind of curse. Even at Bradshaw Ranch, they were saying that the deal is that there's a lot of Native Americans that will go to Sedona and do healing rituals and other energy rituals, or just rituals that are part of their society. But they won't live in the area because of the energy. There's also a creation myth in the valley right outside of Sedona that one tribe actually believes that's where they were created. That's where the sky people brought them forth. The Hopi Indians believed that there were ant people that lived in the underground and that would at various times take them underground during cataclysms. And then when the earth was ready to be inhabited again, they'd kick them out. Or they just they'd go back and repopulate their area. It's wild. The desert is a strange and unusual place. So I usually give like 3 or 4 different examples of what it could be. I got no idea. Other than some sort of dimensional deal, there could be, bear with me on this, one theory is that there are UFOs under the ground of Skinwalker Ranch and of Bradshaw Ranch, and another ranch in Colorado, another ranch in the desert. There's apparently could be a UFO buried underneath there, and they're doing all kinds of experiments. It's absolutely crazy. So it could be that's causing a lot of this. Maybe that's how they travel, is folding time and space, doing a what do you call it, a wormhole to get from here to there, because we know traveling distances, we're talking straight UFOs, traveling distances that you would have to travel even to get to the next star system, or even at the speed of light or astronaut, it'll take you years to get there, centuries sometimes. So there has to, just because we are not hip to the scene on dimensional travel does not mean that it doesn't exist. We just don't know how to do it yet. It's my opinion anyway. It would also explain, if you opened up some dimensional hole, you would probably see, if creatures did come through, they would not look like us. There's going to be a lot of things that don't make sense to us if we're talking from another dimension. If we're talking from another place in our own galaxy, in our own universe, yeah, it probably obeys the same laws of physics that ours does. But if you're talking about a completely different dimension, they might not even be corporeal beings. They might not be physical beings. They might be just energy. We don't know. And that's the really, really cool thing about our world, is that we think we got a good beat. Physicists, they really believe, and I'm with them, that we got a good handle on things for the most part. What drives me crazy, though, is, for my money, the paranormal is part of the gig. It's part of our existence. I don't know anybody that doesn't have a ghost story, somebody in their family doesn't have a ghost story, have a UFO story, have a Bigfoot story. And it's not just the circles I've run in. I have lived all over the place. Like I said, I've been to all 50 states of the Union. I've been all over the world. Talked to a lot of people. I lived on the street for a bit. So I've literally eaten out of dumpsters, and I've eaten with heads of state. When I worked at Oracle, I won a lunch with the president of the Philippines at the time. I got to have dinner with the leader of the Northern Army of Japan. So one thing you do learn with all that kind of experience is we're all a bunch of schmoes. I mean, I don't care if you're a general or you're a private. You still got the same foibles, the same insecurities, the same way of thinking. And I have, especially when people find out you're a paranormal investigator, which I am, where angels fear to tread, check it out. When they find out you're a paranormal investigator, you're going to get sat down and somebody's going to tell you a story. Happens every gathering I have ever been to. So that's it. Really hope you dug the story. Please, again, like, comment, and subscribe. It's really simple to do. It takes like this, click, and it helps me out so much, especially if you enjoy the show. If you enjoy the show, subscribe. Drop me a comment. Hit the like button. It does so much for this channel and for the algorithm of people looking for this kind of material. So I would really appreciate it if you could do that. Also, check out my Patreon page that will be in the notes below. You can become a monthly subscriber. I'm going to start doing shows exclusively for Patreon, as well as we're going to be doing this weekly. I'm going to, right after this, I've got another show written that I want to get on the air as quickly as I can. So, again, I hope you really enjoyed it. I really dig doing this. It's a lot of fun for me. I talk about this stuff all the time anyway. So being able to talk about it and try to share my opinions on it. I've been doing paranormal investigations for over 35 years now. That's a lot of time. And I have a lot of different experiences. And some of those are actually going to make it on the air. Not when a client's hired me. If a client's hired me, there is no footage that makes the internet. Because nobody wants to be that guy. Or live in that house or be that woman. There's still a lot of people. It's this day and age, especially, where something can trend and all of a sudden you're just the dirtbag of the town just because you called for help because you didn't realize what was going on. So none of the private investigations ever make the air. But I will tell you stories about when I was first starting up and some of my scary experiences coming up in the next episode. So again, love you guys. And as always, my brothers and sisters, you keep those heads up. Have a great day.